Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. And as Michelle said, we are come all the way from India, so take this opportunity to ask as many questions. It's a 9.5, 10-hour flight, so it's a long way indeed. Okay, thank you so much for being here this morning. I know it's been a little difficult. I just got to know that we had the largest participant registration for this session. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that this moment. Okay, and I also got stuck. The tunnel's closed, and I think it's difficult to get here this morning. But nonetheless, before I start, I have one request. All mobiles off or on silent, please. It disturbs the flow. Okay. The next thing I'd like to get into is the purpose of this presentation, very much like the title, is to give you a dipstick overview rather, of the vocational opportunity in India. But besides that, that would be way too specific, and India is a very, very large country, so very specific things are not absolutely appropriate. So we'll go beyond that a little bit. We'll talk about India's education sector as well. So the flow of the presentation is, I'll do a very quick career launcher introduction, which is the company that I represent, Career Launcher. It's important for you to know who's talking to you and who's sharing the data with you. We will then, and it'll be shared between the two of us, and I'll invite Satya to take the session on India immersion, we call it, and then go on to an overview of India's education industry. We then get down to very specifics of vocational, and after that there's a small surprise item before we go on to the question and answer session. Okay, so good. I'll start this in earnest. Okay, so career launcher, and let me share with you. First of all, Satya. Satya's the chairman of Career Launcher, also a first-time entrepreneur, and this company was started with about $35 in the pocket, okay, about 15 years ago. Am I right, Satya? Is my conversion right? Okay, yeah, so $35 is in the pocket. And that's yours truly up there. And I lead Career Launcher's vocational education and training practice, okay? This is what Career Launcher is about. Very quickly, we are very large, and we call ourselves a cradle-to-grave education services company. So we are in mainstream education, which is the K-12 schools, higher education, and on this side, you'll also see our products and services basket, which is test prep, vocational training, and mainstream education. So across the spectrum of education services, and when Satya shares with you the India's education landscape, you will sort of be able to correlate this with the education structure of the country and get a sense of, that Career Launchers spans the entire spectrum of education services, including bottom of the pyramid schools for the underprivileged. Okay. A little milestones. We started in 1995, and we started off as a test prep company, and very quickly started building centers across the country. We also then started our chain of schools, and under a different brand name called Indus World Schools. And then we got into higher education as well, after which the only space left was vocational education and training, and so obviously Career Launchers got into that as well. If you come to India and ask anyone about Career Launcher, I would not be surprised if people told you they're the Unilever of education. So that's how we describe ourselves, okay? Very widely geographically dispersed. This is our broad business segments: mainstream education, which is the K-12 schools, local boards, local curriculums, test prep, vocational, And vocational, we've got a number of practices within vocational, including test prep. You can see we've got services for undergraduates as well as graduates. And test prep also includes, test prep is essentially supplemental education. So it includes career advisory services as well as assessments, student counseling, parent counseling, and so on and so forth. And we've got a publication division that supports all our education. Okay, someone told me this looks like chicken pox, but this is what we are. It's real, and therefore you can see how well spread we are across the country. Schools, colleges, vocational centers, and each of these is different. They're all standalone on their own. Okay. So besides building an education business, we also do a lot of work outside that, and we've been recognized for a number of things at international events, one of which is the WorldSkills, where we are the only Indian company that's been invited to share this story with you. We are also part of the UK-India Skill Forum, and for the first time, when the UKISF Awards was instituted, Career Launcher was the first awardee. So there we are. That's our story there. Okay, I will now hand it over to Satya, who will take you through the next couple of slides. And don't worry, I'm not going away. I'll be back in a few minutes. Over to you, Satya. Thank you.
Thanks, Sanjay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Oh, this one? Okay. Can I use the other one? Hello. You know, we are a company of teachers, and this is like a cage for a teacher. So you always want to kind of break free and get into the classroom. Okay. So I'll do that, but I also need to kind of manage this presentation. So let me see how I can toggle these two roles. It's okay, don't worry. How many of you have been to India, visited India once? Wow, it's extremely encouraging. And could you name a couple of places that you've been to? Any city that you've been to? Any town? Any monument? Anything? Oh, okay. That's India. That's India. That's India. That's not Bharat. I'll come to that. Okay. Okay. Wonderful, wonderful. Ahmedabad. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, the young lady is there. Okay. Okay. Sorry? Varanasi? Yeah. I was expecting that to come. Agra? Anybody who's gone to Agra? Taj Mahal? No? Not done that? Okay, so we have some more things to cover, and we could be your hosts when you come there the next time. Okay. You know, the wonderful thing about when I come and present here, in my own head, or in the way we kind of looked at ourselves, was that we're going to share a lot more about India than Career Launcher. I think there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of potential. It's a place of a lot of opportunities over the next couple of decades that we can see. Before I get in, kind of let me leave you with an invitation that is anything that we could do for your explorations in India, please feel free to reach out to us after the session or even after we get back. The most interesting thing, and since you've visited, some of you have visited India, the most interesting thing about India is that it actually is a country of countries, and you know that. Every 100 miles, the language changes. It's true even for a place like UK. You know, Welsh is very different from Scotland, from London, and that's true for every single country in the world. But it just is geographically so spread out that it must be looked at as a country of countries, not just in qualitative terms, but even in quantitative terms. Some of these were the imageries that might have come up when one thought about India about a decade or 2 decades ago. You know, a country of elephants, a country of snakes. Oh yeah, there's one good thing called Taj Mahal, but the rest of it is reasonably challenging. Okay, that has kind of turned significantly just during my own journey as an entrepreneur. You know, when we were in the business school graduating in early 90s, India was an economy it was an administered economy. There was this what internally it's called as a license Raj. Anything that you want to do, you need to go to the government, seek approvals, and it was believed that only guys who have contacts, who have money, who have lineage can be successful as entrepreneurs. Fortunately, as guys like Sanjay and me were graduating in early 90s, 91, 93, the country underwent what we look back now as a very, very critical threshold. It crossed a threshold where the country moved in her mindset from being a license Raj country to an entrepreneurial country. So the economic liberalization actually had a lot that I can share as an entrepreneur, that in building out Career Launcher over the last 15 years, we haven't had to do a lot of things that we had heard guys or entrepreneurs in the earlier era had to do. Maybe a couple of those I'll cover at relevant points in time. Next few slides, I don't need to elaborate. It just captures in a very different form the potential called India. There's an entire Australia in our play schools. Okay. I'm assuming that this doesn't need too much of elaboration. That's a lot of coffee to sip, right? We try and put it, quantitatively, just to help appreciate the size. You know, a bit of macroeconomic data, and I'm sure a lot of you would know it like the back of your palm. But in sum, we're actually talking about a potential which until recently was actually considered as a load on the society. You know, there was a time when we were in school, we were told that the greatest challenge India has is her population and the growth rate of our population. We continue to think, except that we add a rider to it saying that, however, if we crack the education problem, at which India has been able to do reasonably well, while we have lots of challenges over the next couple of decades in terms of execution, but if you are able to make sure that some things in terms of executing education, skills, employability, this actually could be the demographic dividend that we keep talking about. And there was a report that I was reading somewhere saying that in 2022, there are going to be only 2 countries in the world that would have surplus manpower to supply for employability needs across the globe. Obviously, when I say 2, one of them is the answer is here, India. But can you guess which is the other one? That was the whole trick in the question. Which is the other one? No? No? Anything from you, sir? Nigeria. India and Nigeria are considered, are estimated to be only the two countries, nations in the world, who would have surplus manpower to supply to the rest of the globe. It sounds very interesting. Even China would have crossed a stage where the median would have moved over to late 30s or early 40s. So they're not going to have surplus manpower at the entry stage. Very interesting piece of statistics. So we're talking about a nation of a billion plus, and that is showing, in India, the debate that we have these days, and I'm trying to contrast it with the television conversations and discussions that I'm seeing for the last couple of days in UK, is that in India, we are having arguments about whether we will grow at 9% or not. And when the Reserve Bank of India governor or the finance minister insists that we will definitely grow between 8.5% and 9%, people are disbelieving him, saying that, no, but I don't think we'll cross 8%. Now, while that's not so great between 8 and 9, I mean, you would have liked to grow at 9 plus. When we look at it from the perspective of what's happening in the rest of the world, it looks hugely exciting, because there are economies that are going to struggle to ensure that there is a 1% growth. And the context in which I'm highlighting this to you is that if any one of you represents or is in a decision-making position or an opinion-building position to explore India as a place of great opportunity, you have two ambassadors who can unabashedly sell that idea to you. There are huge amount of challenges. We'll talk about it in the next 20 minutes, but I think the underlying those challenges are absolutely unthinkable opportunities in terms of size, in terms of strategically relevant period of time. But what is important is that one is able to take a very medium-term to long-term view and not look at it in terms of quarters that we've kind of begun to look at even as an economy. Too many numbers, but it just kind of goes on to, the education spend in India is about 3%, and it is policy-wise, it is said that we would want to get to 6%. At 3%, even if just assume 3%, India's education spend will go from about $84 billion to about $130 billion by 2016. But if we get to 6% in the next 5 to 7 years' time, it's likely to be about $225 billion. Just the size of education business in India. This is going to be one of the key drivers for any opportunity scanning that anybody who's going to do in any part of the world. And India stands out extremely as an attractive destination for anybody to do it. It actually is, when we go out and look at the way education has played out in the developed economies, we find that India has a lot to learn from the rest of the world, especially the developed economies. There has been execution of vocational education or training or skills, employability for very many decades. And in India, it's just about getting restarted. Quite unfortunately, while a lot of foundations were laid out in the late 50s and 60s for employability-led training through government institutions, we haven't done much work in the last 25 years. And as recently as about 5 years ago, when we used to make our business plans as entrepreneurs, looking at the entire span of education, vocational education or skills never figured in our strategic scanning. It sounds so funny. It has just about re-emerged in the last 4 years, to the point where from being not at all there on the agenda about 5 years ago, today the number one thing that's spoken about in education is vocational, perhaps quickly followed by the K-12 challenges that we continue to have. So interestingly, you will find that what we have is K-12, and what we have right after that is the higher ed. The gulf, which is covered by FE, as we call it here, or the community college ecosystem in the US, which gives mobile, portable, lifelong learning as a system, as an ecosystem, as an education system, that's completely non-existent in India. And we are figuring a way to engineer that framework as we speak. So an organization called National Skills Development Corporation, focused on this particular thing, has come into existence as recently as 4 years ago. So the challenge is that maybe there is not a highway that has been kind of built out and you can drive at 100 miles an hour, but the opportunity that I see is that it's at an early stage, and anybody who's wanting to build out a very, very attractive business in India, I think it's a very good stage to come in, because lots of things are being discovered. And for India, forging partnerships, collaborations, technology transfer, know-how, all of it, Indian entrepreneurs or even regulatory bodies, they are going out there to seek that. So I don't know which part of this ecosystem you are a part of, but there's tremendous opportunity to collaborate with an appropriate agency or a company in India. Okay. K-12 is the largest subcategory in the Indian education space, and you will be surprised to know, or maybe a little, yeah, maybe surprise is the right word, most neutral that I can imagine, is that the concept of vocational education is non-existent. And if you look at the statistics of any country in the world, maybe anywhere between 15 to 22 or 23% of the students who go past K through 12 go into higher education. But in economies like Germany or UK or Australia or US, over 60 to 70% of them are very well absorbed into the vocational training business, vocational training activities. A lot of it happens in the school stage itself. In India, that's non-existent. So everybody is aiming to become an engineer or a doctor or something like that. And if he's unsuccessful, then the thought of the next level of options, they begin to take shape. And many a time it's too late. And there aren't enough opportunities for them to do it in a very structured manner. So one of the things that we do undertake is that in our K-12 business, we run over 18 schools right now. It started about 5 years ago. We're trying to see how we could map the higher ed with the FE, further ed kind of a orientation right at grade 8, 9, 10 onwards. Some interesting statistics, about 20 million are entering schools at the kindergarten level each year. That tells you that even if in India today there are enough schools to serve everybody and everybody is going to school, we need that many new schools every year. And if you take a capacity of, let's say, 1,000 kids in a school, we're talking about 20 million divided by 1,000, about 20,000 schools we need every year. 20,000 new schools every year. Of course, it spans the entire economic spectrum. It could be a very, very high-end school in Delhi or a Mumbai, or it could be a schools for the poor in the farthest of villages. This is a very interesting statistic. I could have asked you in the form of a quiz, and even in India, most people don't get it right. Can you imagine that there are 40,000 schools where there's infrastructure, there are teachers, but there are no kids. So on one hand, we have lack of supply. On the other hand, where there are some places where there is supply, there is lack of learners. And that is fundamentally because of the poor quality of education being delivered by the government schools. And while this school is not being used by the community nearby, there's a school that would be next door run by an entrepreneur which is trying to deliver, or which is delivering higher quality at the same price point. He is overflowing with kids. So one of the interesting aspects is that while we might think that India is a country where charging a price is a challenge, there is a reality along with that where the parents are willing to pay a higher dollar, higher rupee, provided the outcomes are very good. I think that's very important. India needs, as we speak, about 1,500 universities, and we were just about 300 universities 3 years ago. Over the last 3 years, the government has begun to run very hard, and we've reached now a figure of anywhere between 500 or 600. The figures vary depending upon whose numbers are you taking. But India needs to build out 800 to 900 more universities to meet the current demands. And even when we were talking about this, the vocational universities are close to zero. The kind of numbers that I get to see here in a country like UK, and the number of students that they are servicing, these are absolutely non-existent in India. And most of the higher educational institutions, they run as an engineering college or a management school, but they end up being employability training institutions because the quality is not so great either. So there's a great opportunity for them to come and see how do they improve themselves, and somebody from here could go and collaborate with them. You know, this is an important thing. These are the numbers, and these are all done by independent agencies. So one way of looking at it is we have a long way to travel as far as educational quality is concerned. And what is it that you could grab in this? Supplementary education. These are the numbers, you know. But you don't see any vocational college there in figuring in that. If we need about 500 million to be trained, just about 10% of them are getting trained. 90% of the manpower that you will find in at a restaurant or in the airline industry or as a refrigeration mechanic, most of them are not trained. They pick it up as they learn it in the shop floor or in the factory, and certification would be even fewer. So that's the kind of numbers we're talking about. You know, in the vocational space, as you and we know, the most important thing is the outcome-led delivery model, where you're able to provide guaranteed employment at the end of it. And that needs an ecosystem where the trainers, the certifiers, the industry bodies, the companies, all of them come together and they're able to give the entire gamut of promises that leads to an employment. Even that's something that we're trying to figure out. We're at a very early stage of doing it. That's a little bit of a broad brush about K-12, higher ed, vocational of India. We now get a little bit more into vocational, and maybe I'll request Sanjay to come and take over here. Sanjay?
Okay, thank you, Satya. Guys, just a few words of caution. The numbers are, for some of you, probably are going to be fairly overwhelming. And don't worry too much about the zeros. Even if you take away 1 0, it's still very large numbers. Okay. Just a few points on what Satya mentioned. You did see the 70% below the age of 35. That essentially is in India now titled and all sorts of B schools across the world do case studies on India, and that's called the demographic dividend. So that's what we are focusing on. And just to add to Satya, there are 169 million school dropouts who should be in school but are not. Only less than 10% of all those who enter the education system actually go in for any type of higher education. So all that needs to be channeled into vocational. So what we're going to talk about, as Satya mentioned, it's not about career launcher. We're going to get down to telling you about India's vocational. So we'll start in earnest. This is the meat of this thing. One very important thing is, lots of people have said this, by 2020, India will be the net exporter if it plays all its cards well, and if we get all the help that we need to and have to. We will be a work manpower surplus nation, while the rest of the world is going to be deficit nation. And so we'd be able to export plumbers, electricians, carpenters, welders, mechanics, and so on and so forth. Okay. Yeah, Satya. Okay. So this is what we call the big, hairy, audacious goal. 500 million skilled, and this has come right from the top, right from the Prime Minister's office. The President said it a number of times in his Republic Day and Independence Day speeches, and this journey has started about 4 or 5 years ago, okay, when the 11th plan started. Yeah, Satya. Okay, so our purpose is essentially when you walk out of that door, you'd all have gone through chapter 1 of India's vocational education and training market, right? So you'd step out. So we start in earnest. First and foremost, unlike any other country, vocational education and training are two different things in India. So there is VE, vocational education, and there is vocational training. These are two very different things. Vocational education is essentially the other word of it is vocationalization of education, which is mainstream education. It falls under the Ministry of Human Resources Development. It is, and the Ministry of Human Resources is the single owner of the entire mainstream education. Please recall the layers of education space that we showed you. Mainstream education, okay, and it's very academic, okay. While this is the Ministry of Labor and Employment, MOLE, and DGET is called the Director General of Employment and Training, which is primarily responsible for industrial training, okay, and focused on labor markets. Right. Next, please, Satya. Okay. So, just to share with you, 14 million people enter India's labor market every year. Okay. But India's current vocational training capacity is about 4 million, and this has grown and it's almost doubled over the last 5 years. So we were even worse off just about 4 or 5 years ago. Okay. 90% of existing workforce, no exposure, no vocational training, no certification in place. So the electrician who comes to fix the wiring in your house does not have certification. So you don't know whether he's mixing the phase and neutral, and that could blow your hair dryer or your television maybe, okay? And none of us asked for it. My driver doesn't have any certification. I just went and checked with someone, who did you work with last, the last time? And he tells me Mr. X and Mr. Y, and so I call Mr. X and Mr. Y, how's the guy? Does he drink too much? Is he okay with the driving? And so on and so forth. So that's probably the only certification that's there, okay? Only 2 million pass out. And look at 90% of school students drop out between grades 6 to 10. Okay, so there are 169 million kids who need to be put through vocational training, okay? Yes, Satya, please. Okay. So the government came up with what we call a national skill development policy, and what I'm trying to do is just distill the very important and specific and the critical items. And it's very important to notice that high inclusivity, that means it must cater to urban and rural and underprivileged, and those who are economically backward. It will focus on outcomes, okay, and funds to be deployed for activities and training and not building assets and buildings and so on and so forth. And like Satya mentioned, there are 40,000 schools you could walk into and the government would give that to you free of cost and say, please conduct vocational training and we'll pay for this, okay. Financing to be separated from delivery, and this still hasn't happened. Effective assessment and credible certification. So this is a journey, okay, and that is why it's a 15-year plan. And which is why when someone wants to come in and access India's vocational VET market, must have such a long time span in mind, such a long horizon in mind. Okay, it's not bang, bang, bang. Okay, yeah, Satya, thanks. So essentially, policy essentials, and I further drilled this down. Inclusive PPP, all government projects, everyone's looking at public-private partnerships. This is what's going to happen. This is the flavor of the month, and it's going to continue to be the flavor for the next couple of years. Okay, and it's outcomes-led, and funding is now completely linked to outcomes. So the government and whoever is funding vocational education and training, and this is going to get high government funding simply because there is a failure of the marketplace. Okay, the education system has failed. You've got dropouts. So government is going to fund this, but the funding is going to be completely linked to outcomes. And what I mean is, the government is going to say, I'm going to give you $100 for training this guy and getting him certified as a plumber and so on and so forth. But I'll give you only 40 upfront and or 60 upfront, and the balance 40 will come after you've placed him and you've got him employed. Okay, so that's important to note. Yeah. Uh, so 500 million, how is this distributed? It's distributed across various government bodies, government ministries, government departments, and the top of the food chain, so to say, is NSDC, National Skill Development Corporation. I will go through some of these in my next few slides. Ministry of Labor Employment, and all of these are, they've distributed the 500 million and given responsibility and accountability to these ministries and departments. Okay, yes, Satya. And expected budgets and spends, rather, of key departments till 2022. I know this looks daunting, and these are conservative estimates, honestly speaking. Okay, so the NSDC alone is 15 billion US dollars over the next 10, 15 years. Okay, and this is the kind of spends and budgets that they're working on at this moment. Yes, Satya? So we come to the NSDC, National Skill Development Corporation. Okay, this is the mouthpiece. This is the action part of the government of India. NSDC was exclusively set up to be the government's working machinery on the ground to catalyze the agenda of 500 million. Okay, so NSDC's got the mandate for catalyzing, setting up a marketplace so that there is industry, there is vocational training providers like Career Launcher, there are students, there is certification standards, there are assessments, skill sector councils. Is NSDC's building those. Okay, so and so NSDC is going to be the single channel for the government to all other stakeholders. Okay, this is the DGET, and the DGET is the owner of all the industrial training institutes. There are about 8,400 of them, and they are the original industrial training or vocational training institutes in the country. Okay, and there are 8,400 of them. And if you recall from a slide at the back, I said 4.1 million is currently our training capacity. About 30% of that is the ITIs, which belongs to the DGET, and which is why it's got a target of 100 million. Yeah. Again, DGET, and they've also come up, so to start putting this on a fast track, what the government has done is, while the ITIs had very traditional, very draconian 1-year and 2-year programs, they also came up with 90-hour, 120-hour, the 1 month, 2 month, and 3 months programs, which are called minimum employable scheme or modular employable scheme. So you could quickly learn something in 90 hours, and come in, get into the classroom, spend just about a month, and go back and get into work right away. Okay, all of this, by the way, is over and above the apprentices stuff. Okay, and that still needs to happen. Yes, Satya. This is the other large mandate, ministry that's got a mandate, which is Ministry of Rural Development, that ensures, if you recall, high inclusivity. Okay, so you need to also ensure that funding and all the benefits of vocational training reaches the underprivileged or the rural. Okay, and this is the Ministry of Rural Development, and they have something that's called the National Rural Labor Employability Mission, and which also has large amounts of funding going out to private sector. For example, Career Launcher has a number of projects with the MORD. Okay, yeah. And Ministry of HRD, which is the VE part, if you go back to the slide, if you recall that slide, and the Ministry of HRD is going to focus on vocationalization of education, which means including vocational training and skills training in mainstream education when kids are in class 7, class 8, and it's probably going to start at class 8, and also remember that's the time when the largest number of kids drop out of school. So they're saying that we'll keep them back in school, but not put them through an academic program, but get them to become carpenters or fitters or or chase some vocation. Yes. Okay. There are a number of projects. So while you've got a number of projects by these, there are very many projects. Most of this is available on the website, and they're in various stages of tendering and RFPs and RFQs and things like that. Yeah. Okay. Uh, Besides, so all that I showed you just now was this government of India, the federal government, and we've also got every state, and you've seen India is a country of countries. So every state by itself is a mini country, and every state also has its own agenda. So a number of projects and a lot of funding going out, coming out from the states. So each state has a different project, but all states generically have something called skill and knowledge commission. Okay, or mission on livelihood. So there is a Rajasthan mission on livelihood, there is a Gujarat mission on livelihood, R Mall, G Mall, K Mall, okay, and all of these are vocational training projects funded by the local state governments. Yes, Satya, please. Uh, if I distill more of what the government is saying and all the NSD policy that's being put out and up on the websites, guys, very quickly a distillation for all of you. This is what the government is committing to over the next 10 years. Skill development centers, which is reaching out right to the last mile. Skill development centers, 400 million bucks to be spent on that. Vocational education in schools. BPL is below the poverty line youth. Okay, so those who are the most disadvantaged of society. Remember, it's high inclusivity. Urban training, therefore, poor people in urban areas. So there's urban poor and rural poor. Okay, so it's going to cover both of these. New polytechnics, when we say polytechnics, it's FE colleges. The government's setting up a PPP model and inviting companies like Career Launcher, can you come, we'll give the funding, we'll give the land, we'll give the building, can you come and set up an FE college? Okay, so that's where it's at. Okay, so we are moving from skill, and at the moment the government's focusing completely on capacity and capability building. So it's moving from, we have about 3.1 million that we started off with in 2007. It's gone up to 4.1, but it needs to go up to 15 million very quickly in the next 24 months. Rather 12 months really, and then goes on to 50 million. And remember, this is all a journey towards the 500 million. Okay? Yes, Satya? And I'm mindful of the time, we're running out of time really. So and there are some sectors, so why 500 million, we'd have another question, what sectors? So there's automobiles, building and construction, ITS, organized retail, these are some of the sectors, and this is the distribution of the 500 million. Okay, Satya? Yeah. Just to share with you, every sector has a skill pyramid or a skill hierarchy, and this is the minimal education, the MES that we spoke about. So the government started putting this in structure, and it's focused on the unskilled, bringing people from the outside, and then you've got skill category 1, category 2, and as you get into category 2 and category 3, you get into, we are talking about people who are in the higher education space, formal higher education, the colleges, the universities, and things like that. So every sector, Satya? Yeah, retail sector, we need 1.5 million, healthcare is the same, and all of these percentages, for example, BFSI, largest number of people required of the 1.5 million every year is minimal education, which is called feet on street, collection agents going out, knocking on doors, collecting documents for people to open new bank accounts or credit cards, or just collecting supporting documents for credit cards. Okay, yeah. Automobile sector, helpers, cleaners, fitters, technicians, which is purely FE stuff, skills category. So skills category 1 is really FE. Okay, in a sense, from what I've seen in the UK, I've spent some time here, so that's where we are. Creative industry, again, typist, data operators, moving up to DTP operators, and then you've got your engineers and so on and so forth. Yeah. So very quickly, distillations, we've got a skill hierarchy pyramid. You've got secondary and tertiary level, and at the moment, minimum and entry level. Now, all government funding, all government projects, everything's happening at minimum entry level. Okay, especially in the Ministry of Labor and Employment. While the Ministry of HRD is largely going to focus on this, and there's going to be fair amounts of focus on secondary and tertiary level, because you have also seen India needs 1,500 new universities every year for the next 10 years. Okay, there's that much requirement of capacity and capability. Yes. Another way of looking at it, various rust collar, blue collar, gray collar, and you've got government and you've got private industry now also doing a lot of stuff in the white collar space. So people going for SAP training and IT training and so on and so forth, which is also enhancement really. Yes. Okay. And every industry has a very different skill pyramid. Okay, it depends on the size of the base or the bottom of the pyramid, and this is how it looks in terms of skill sophistication and enhancement propensity. So we've sort of mapped that, and just in case some of you would be interested in making money much faster, so you have ITES, okay, but which requires much more investment. Yes, Satya. Business model perspective, India is obviously all about very high volumes at the right price. I'm not saying low price, I'm saying right price. You know, there's a sweet spot on the price, okay? So very quickly, employability, there's livelihood training, which is the bottom of the pyramid, minimum skills level, and enhancement training, which any one of us, if we went for an extra course, would be called enhancement training, right? Okay, so that's one view to look at it. So essentially, this is it, 460 million guys. Livelihood training, enhancement training, both these opportunities exist, and both of these are bang in the FE and higher education space, really. Yeah. Finally, the government is very, very critical in this space. We've had some, I'll just show you photographs of our initiative, the Skill School initiative, and what a typical vocational education and training center would look like, a VET center. Yeah, Satya? So there are these guys working on, they're doing engine repair, scooter, motorcycle repair mechanics. This is an electrical lab. Okay, this is a kitchen, and we run an hospitality program here, so catering. So every time you go there, the kids would serve you in this kitchen. Okay, these are our classrooms, and all other vocational centers are very much like this. This is an diesel engine repair mechanic program, and these are our students there working with an engine. You can see some of them here as well, opening it up. Some more classrooms, air conditioning and refrigeration, and all of them become air conditioning mechanics and join air conditioning companies. So very quickly, critical success factors, guys. Investment perspective, we've seen that, and we've told you it's a 15-year story. It's not a 6-month, it's not a 1 year, it's not a 2 year, it's a 15-year story, it's a journey. Okay, so you need to have staying power, stay invested, the long ROI cycles, and very important, employment linkages. You can't stop at employability, you've got to go further and also talk about employment, and you need to ensure that, because fundings is now getting linked to those outcomes. Okay, yes, Satya, next please. So while I've said this, the number of things that are still happening in the pipeline, NVQF, the National Vocational Curriculum Framework, is getting qualifications and curriculums getting into place. Sector skill councils are coming into being at this moment. NSDC is driving all of that. And there's lots and lots of more money in the pipeline. There's lots of World Bank funding also coming in. We've got a number of projects that are World Bank funded. And as you can see, the number of things, and there's some numbers there, and there's some revenue numbers there, the figures, you know, in US $1 million. Yeah. Besides just the training, you've got a host of other opportunities where we've got opportunities for getting ready vocational trainers, vocational assessors, college and school staff, finishing grooming schools, English language training, because India's, it's a global marketplace now, and we're exporting manpower, okay? Yes. So finally, still back to this last slide once again, inclusive outcomes, public-private partnerships. That's what India's, the flavor of the month there, yeah. And finally, guys, words of caution. so while all of this, you've seen the numbers, you've seen all the data, it looks wow. Okay, let's get in there. Words of caution, it's still a marketplace, the industry is still getting its feet together, it's getting its act together. It's very much like entering a dark room and you're groping around looking for the switch. You know, you want to flip the switch and get some light, but all you're going to do is, at this moment, I'd say just be happy with the torchlight and try and find your nook and cranny and see where you want to sit down and fit there. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I think we're just about, yeah, made it in time. Thank you very much. I don't know, do we have time for question and answers, Michelle? Or maybe over coffee. Okay, so Michelle's telling us it's time. Before we go, I've got a small surprise item. I'm pleased to have Satya release. Oh, Michelle. Yes, please. I'll have Michelle from WorldSkills. Michelle, please. Okay. Release a research report on India's vocational education industry, and we put this together specifically for the WorldSkills, Michelle. So, Michelle, there it is. Okay. Thank you so much, Michelle. Okay.